This is the Southern Collective Hunting Podcast, the underground voice of the Southern hunter. Whether you're watching live, catching it later on YouTube, or listening on the go, we are glad you're here. Let's get after it.
All right, fellas, we are back. It's SoCo Live. This time you've got Parker and I and a special guest. If you're a member of our Patreon community, you have been begging to have this guy on from the moment that he posted his first video 2 months ago. I cannot believe it's 2 months since you first posted your video, but we got the Whitetail guru himself, Mr. Derrick Dixon. Dude, I appreciate you carving time. You were straight out of the woods. You were in the woods. You came running in, turned on the mic, and here you are.
That is exactly correct. Yeah, I even had a little sweat on my brow because it's 90 degrees outside. So, yeah, it's pretty miserable. But thanks for having me on.
Absolutely, dude. Is 90 degrees normal this time of year for y'all?
No, absolutely not. No, I think last week it was like 78 to 82. It was beautiful. And then all of a sudden, I went out and we planted food plots, and me and my uncle did, and we drilled them all in. And it had showed that we were going to have rain 2 days after the day that we planted. And literally that night, it was kind of like, I used to be a roofer back in the day as well, like prior to being a tech guy. And whenever I was a roofer, whenever I'd go to bed at night, it would show like 100% chance of rain in the morning. And it's like, oh, thank the Lord. Like I get to sleep in for once and I don't have to go to work. And then you'd wake up in the morning and it's just like 0%. And you're pretty much screwed. I think Walter has left us.
So have you actually been in the woods hunting, or you just been in the woods just hanging out, scouting, doing your thing?
Oh, yeah, you weren't here for that part. Yeah, I've just been scouting.
Oh,
I wasn't
cool.
actually in the woods either. I was out at ag on an ag property. So
okay.
I was living kind of a luxurious life. I was sitting on the edge of a fence over
Just
a soybean
glassing,
field.
weren't
So
you?
just
Yeah,
glassing.
dude. Glassing, which I know this is kind of a lot of what we're talking about today, is kind of like, being able to see deer from a long ways away with minimal intrusion, right? But when you go into ag country, Midwestern ag country, I just left Kentucky for the opener this past weekend, and it's such a benefit, man, being able to sit on a bean field. Like, it's something I've never gotten to do until the first time I went to Kentucky. And I was like, oh, how are these guys not killing deer? This is like a crazy
You
benefit.
can watch them leave the woods and walk into the field. It's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Absolutely.
It's a fun way to hunt. I really like the glassing part. I wish that I lived in a state where you could really do that. And here in Alabama, and I know Walt down in Florida, it's kind of hard to do that.
Yeah,
in the big woods areas.
area. Yeah, I'm like 99% big woods where I'm at, but there's a couple ag properties, and I get to go out and do that every once in a while, where you can look over a bean field. And it's definitely not natural for this area because you go out and you start glassing over a field, and there's like one 20-acre soybean field that's doing good in one season.
Yeah.
And that one 20-acre soybean field's holding like 150 deer at one time, and it's like, what is going on at this place?
Yeah.
It's pretty crazy. Which actually, in turn, like, from the perspective of going out and looking at deer, it's awesome. But come September 15th, I don't know how you're going to hunt that. That's not a really easy situation with 150 deer in one location. So it's cool to be able to see them and scout. It's actually kind of something I'm going to mention in my next video. Kind of a little prelude to that, but yeah. Is Walter alive still?
I was waiting on Walt to say something, and he just kind of was like saying nothing. I guess he's
kind of stoned. He's in a mode right now.
He doesn't look like he even sees us here or
I
hears
think he's
us.
got a problem. Okay.
I did actually. My screen kind of like I could hear you guys, but I couldn't unmute myself, and I couldn't see my screen for whatever reason. So,
Derrick, this is the way it works. So, like, I'll
go.
chat with you, but sometimes I try to leave a spot where Walter can say something because I know he's got an agenda for a podcast like this, and so. Sometimes
I was waiting for him to plug in. He looked excited over there. He just
I mean, I usually we're pretty good on that.
So.
Yeah, no, for sure. But I actually heard everything, even when I was in there trying to get my kid, convince my toddler to go back to sleep. I left my earbuds in. I'm jealous of the kind of guys that get to do exactly what you're talking about, which you're able to watch a field and take any kind of inventory. Like, that's wild. The closest I get to inventory is like a batch of cell cameras and a cutover, but I've got one burning question right off the rip, and I'm just curious, like, where did the genesis of all of this come from? Because it's not cheap to get into, right? So there has to be a natural curiosity there.
That is correct.
And then, yeah, I get it, dude. Like,
Yeah.
it's none of this is cheap. But like, where was this? Was this like I'm curious what happened and it blew into something, or did you just wake up one day and go, this is what we're doing?
Yeah. I think there's a couple things that stemmed and started it, but the initial idea and where it came from was in like 2019 or 2020. I don't remember. I had just gotten a new job. I dropped out of college. I was going to college for conservation biology, and I dropped out of college for a really good technology job that I was completely underqualified for, and I don't know, the guy just liked me or something. And whenever I did so, though, I had been into photography for quite a while at that point, maybe a couple of years, and I had owned a DJI Inspire. And just through poking around online and whatnot, I'd always been a bow hunter my whole life, ever since I could, and then I always hunted ever since I was like 6 years old or something, whenever I could in Missouri. And the DJI Inspire, there was a camera attachment you could purchase for it, and it was a thermal camera. It was like, oh, that's cool. So I started kind of thinking, and I'd done a lot of fishing as well at that time frame, and I'd always wondered when I was fishing over particularly like an old pond or something that's really kind of fuzzy and you can't see anything in it. I'd always wondered where all the big bass were, and it wasn't from the perspective that I wanted to cast my lure in front of them and catch them every single time. I was just curious to, like, dependent upon the weather on this day and it's sunny or it's cloudy or it's rainy. Like, I just wanted to know where they were, just to know where they are. Like, there's no other meaning behind that. I was just curious. And whenever I saw that thermal camera attachment, I automatically, like, bells started ringing in my head. Like, you can see deer with this thing. There's no way you couldn't. And I'd watched some search and rescue stuff with one, and like you could definitely spot a deer with it, but no one was doing it at the time. And also it was really expensive and just not something that I was going to be able to afford. So, because I just started that job. And then shortly after I got married, and then fast forward 2022, the DJI Matrice 30T came out. And that drone, I remember watching the trailer for it on DJI's website, and I almost had a stroke in my office, like, in the fact that it was the greatest thing I'd ever seen. It had a thermal camera, it had a zoom camera, and then the biggest thing for me was you could drop rangefinder pins. You could drop like actual longitude lat pins on a map, and then you could export them as a .stl file into like an application like Onyx, and then you can go back and connect the dots yourself, kind of like a GPS color study, but as frequent as you want, and you can record the deer. And I saw this, and I knew that, like, its application was not for me. Like, that's not why they made this drone, but it was perfect for me. Like, I had to own it. And
Yeah.
I went home and I told my wife, like, I will own this drone. I don't care if I have to sell my truck. I don't care. Like, I will sell all my camera equipment. I'm owning the drone. And
Right.
very, very shortly after, I think we'd already known a little bit, but she was pregnant, and my first son was born. And that kind of stalemated that. As like, well, probably shouldn't go spend $15,000 on a drone or something. That's not a good idea.
Not kidding about selling the truck.
At that time, whenever they came out, they were $15,000, and that didn't include extra batteries or any of the other, whatever. The prices have come down significantly since then. But anyways, fast forward 2024, I'd been working the same tech job that I was underqualified for, etc., and I hated it. I hated working in an office, and my boss could see that in me, that I was just like, I was actually in a pretty dark place mentally, because I was living in a big city. I didn't like living in a big city. I wanted to go outside all the time, and I wanted to focus on research and wildlife photography. Throughout that time frame, I'd become really passionate about wildlife photography, and he could just tell, like, we've got to do something for you, because, like, you're not clicking. And we had talked about it for a while, and fast forward a month or so after we'd had a conversation about that, then my second child was born, my daughter, and we'd came home from the hospital. I was on paternity leave, and I was at the house for like 3 or 4 hours, and my boss had called me, who's a really good friend of mine, the guy I had the conversation with, and he was like, "Hey man, how'd all the things, new kid and everything go?" And everything was great, and we talked about it. And he's like, "Well, I really called you because I wanted to let you know that I was firing you." And I was just like, okay. That's
Glad you
interesting.
started with asking how my child was.
Thanks for starting with my child. Yeah, and now I have 2 kids, not just one, and no job, and I'm going to have to figure out how to do all of that financially. And but he knew my dream, and he knew in the background like that's what I'd been wanting to do, and if I would fully apply myself to it, it could be something really cool. And he didn't really understand the fullness of it, but he kind of knew like I needed to go do something else. So I remember coming from that phone call and walking back into my house to my wife and just looking her in the eyes and being like, I'm buying the drone. Like, no questions asked. I'm buying the stinking drone. We're moving back home to my hometown, and I'm just going to do research. And I'm not going to get a job. We're going to live off savings, and it's just going to be a full send. I'm just going to watch as many deer as I can, especially mature bucks, and I'm going to document every variable that I possibly can from the time they get up, the time they go down, every single wind direction, wind speed, the amount of defecation frequency. Like, I'm talking every single detail that you could possibly think of. I was documenting it. And so that's what I did, and I treated it like a full-time job throughout the entire last season. I actually started it would have been June of 2024 is whenever I started flying. So I know that first video said like 9 months, but really I started in June. So it had been a full year by the time I posted my first video. So
What was
Jake
her
Booth,
What was her response? I want to know what your wife's response was. Like how was she?
And depending on the answer, does she have sisters?
Yeah, she had some stepsisters, but actually, she'd known about this dream of mine for a long time, and I had everything kind of storybooked in a Google Doc for years, and it's a massive document of tons of ideas and videos that have literally been like pre-scripted and storybooked for years that I've been working on while I was at my technology job. And I wasn't really doing my job, was I? I was working on my future, and anyways, but yeah, so she knew where I was at mentally with that, and she kind of actually just trusted me and the fact that like I'm a pretty smart guy sometimes, and it seems like because whenever I would explain the idea of what I was going to be doing in terms of researching deer with a thermal drone to friends and family and my wife and whatnot, then some people would kind of look at me a little confused because it's just like, okay, but like they're just deer. Like why does this matter so much? And it's like, no, but you don't understand. Like no one's ever done this ever. In the history of man, no one has ever been able to do this. And I'm going to be able to be the first one that's ever done it. And I've had the idea for 4 years, but like now I'm going to finally be able to do it. And it's that cool at that level. So that's kind of where that went.
Justin Moser says that his wife would kill him on the spot. That's
Yeah,
exactly
dude,
what my wife would
Dude,
do.
But
Justin,
seriously,
you just
props
gotta
to her,
full send
man.
it,
Props to
Yeah,
her. That's
no, for
pretty
sure.
neat. That's a pretty neat chain of events. A husband has
Yeah.
a dream, wife trusts him. Like that's, it's the same thing that happened to me. And my wife trusted me in my dream, and we were able to make it work. But there's a lot of guys who don't have that luxury, and
Yeah.
quite honestly, maybe they shouldn't. You know what I mean? Like,
Mhm.
like it's probably a good thing that their wives
and
keep
to
them in
suggest
line.
that like it was just like an easy going, like just go out and buy the drone and start doing research and like, oh, it's fun. Like, no, that you're sucked. Like it was absolutely brutal. I've been working for like still today, like 12 to 16 hours a day for the last year, nonstop. That's all I do. I do all my motion graphics. I'm the only. This is the guy. Like I'm the one that made my logos. I'm the one that made my website. I'm the one that's done everything. And so I've poured a tremendous amount of time into this project over that period of time, and especially early on for the first few months, like getting it going and starting in the research. There are a lot of time frames where it's like, I'm credentialed with as a tech guy. I can go out and get another good paying job tomorrow if I need to, because like we need the money. But do I do that and then I commit to a full-time job that I'm only, I'm going to be like half baked in, and is that going to interfere with my dream? And in the end, it was just like, you know what? No. And I actually did apply to one, and I got accepted for it for an in-person interview, and I ended up turning them down. I remember that day because it was kind of like a big day for me. It's like I can either pursue this big job with a tech company, or I can just let's continue to do the drone thing. And I chose the drone thing, and I'm pretty excited that I did. So.
That's crazy. I mean, that's a wild chain of events, man. It's really cool.
Yeah.
So what is your actual dream? Like what is the dream if you could put it in a nutshell for us?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, it's kind of weird for me. If I could go out and I could just do wildlife photography every day of my life, then I would, and that's all I would do. I wouldn't show my pictures to anybody because I don't give a crap. I would just go out and take pictures for myself, print them at home, put them on my wall, and I would love myself, and it'd just be fun. I would enjoy that. But wildlife photography doesn't make much money, and not a lot of people give a crap about it. So I was trying to find a way to get myself in the outdoor industry, and this was one of the ways. And the reason I was so interested in it, actually, and this kind of will stem back towards why, because a lot of people ask me the question, what was it like not bow hunting, throughout that time frame? Like, you gave up your hunting season. And actually, that's where the story kind of stems back towards my grandpa. And my grandpa, he was he'd helped me get everything that's on my wall behind me type situation. He's the one that taught me how to do it. And whenever I was growing up, then it kind of entered a point where I had killed quite a few deer, like 7 or 8, and it felt like it was time to get him back on a big mature buck, because like he'd been sacrificing all of the good locations and putting in the time for us and getting us on good deer. And whenever I got older, then it was like I really want to do that and pay the return. So me and a cousin and a couple other people, we went in and we put in good food plots, and we worked on these tree stand locations off in the staging areas and everything, and kind of really combed his areas and made them perfect for him. And I remember one time I took him out there, and I think he was 79 years old at this time. And I took him out there, and he'd climbed in a summit climber up in the tree at 79, and he had hunted with his crossbow that day. And we made it back to the cabin at the end of the hunt, and we were, I kind of exchanged what I saw that day and in my experience, and he did as well. And he'd seen one of the target bucks, and he was like, "Oh yeah, I saw, blank blank, whatever his name was. We named our deer back then." And he's like, "I saw him, and I had him at 30 yards." And I just kind of looked at him weird, like, "Why are we not going to track him then?" And he's like, "I just thought he was one of the most beautiful deer I've ever seen in my life." And I was like, "Okay. Why are we not going to track it?" Like, I didn't really, like, it didn't resonate with me. And he's like, "I just thought it was fun to watch him." Like, and he told me about that experience, and then he'd had multiple more of those experiences going forward where he just really enjoyed sitting in front of mature bucks and watching their behavior and being able to observe how they're interacting with other deer. And that started kind of rubbing off on me in like 2020 to 2021, really, probably 2021. And that's whenever I started, more often than not, leaving my bow behind and taking my wildlife camera and really trying to get sub 30 yards as often as I could, so I could take the coolest wildlife pictures as possible, so I could bring them back and show them to my grandpa and be like, "Hey, look at this." Like, those were the experiences that he enjoyed more than getting one put on the wall. So, yeah.
I got an idea. Me and you and your grandpa can all get on a lease. I'll let you guys, y'all just have at it, man. Y'all have at it.
Yeah.
Like,
if it's a property that I'm not researching, I'm still pulling my bow back. So.
that's right.
I like how the guy who's like, "Yeah, I just started taking the camera more and more. We all see what's on the wall behind you." So like, what he's not telling you is, I ran out of real estate on the wall, so I started shooting them with the camera.
Yeah. No, don't worry. This is a 50 by 100 shop. I've got plenty of wall space. Yeah.
It's cool though. They say
problem.
they say in turkey hunting, and I'm assuming it applies in deer hunting, is that's kind of like the sign of a true hunter, right? Is somebody who doesn't have to pull the trigger just because they see the animal, right? And so that's pretty neat, and it's inspiring. I got to say, I'm never going to be that guy, but
me either.
it is cool. Like, I think it's cool, and you get great shots because of it. Like, we all get to enjoy that, and so it's a neat. And I'm a creative too. I understand, like, when you see something and you create something and you get that shot, it's like, it's special, man. And so, and you've obviously done a great job with it over the past year. It was a year that was definitely worth it, it sounds like.
Yeah. And another thing to take away from that is, if you think about like the experiences that you've had with a truly dominant mature buck, where maybe you'd seen him for 30 seconds, or maybe you've seen him for like 2 or 3 minutes, and you didn't get to kill him. You were forced to sit there and observe him walk out of range that entire time frame. You can probably recall that memory and tell a 30-minute story off of it because of how impactful that moment was for you. So that was another thing that I started noticing as I continued hunting. And that's also, I mean, that's one of the main drivers for a lot of people in general that get into bow hunting. Not only is it more challenging, but you actually get to sit there and observe and interact with these mature animals, and you're forced to fail time and time again until you're able to get within range, and it's more difficult, but you're also you're learning so much more as a bow hunter over whenever you're bringing a rifle to the woods every single time. But that's just one little insight that I've started realizing as well. So.
Did you find that you had more opportunity, like when you didn't have the pressure of trying to kill an animal? Did you find
Mhm.
that you were maybe willing to go in a little bit deeper, and maybe did you figure out any thresholds for your hunting? Like, oh, I could definitely do more than what I'm doing right now.
Yeah, no, I think it makes you feel a little more free in one side of things, but you also, especially with photography, you're wasting, in hunting, you're not really wasting your time. If you go out and you see him, like if you get eyes on a mature buck and he's 60 yards out or whatever and he cruises by, that's a lot of intel learned for you as a hunter, and like you can use that to potentially get him killed. But as a photographer, if you consistently go out and you're missing him by 60 yards in deep timber, then you're getting zero content. Like there, and like the whole side of things is like you really want to get as close as possible to get the best photos in most cases, dependent upon landscape. And yeah, no, if you're failing to that level as a photographer, then it's like you're really not doing a good job because you're walking away with absolutely nothing. Obviously, you get the intel that you need to move a little closer, but no, in the end, I got pretty stinking good at getting sub 30, 40 yards to mature bucks, which I'd already been pretty decent at it, but I got better. So.
It's legit.
What
Sounds
what
fun.
what was your highest aspiration for this project, right? Because I'm a big picture kind of guy, right? I like to live
Yeah.
at 10,000 feet and kind of see and find different ways to connect different functions. When you set out, are you there? Are you living the highest possibility, or is it still on the horizon for
no,
you?
no, and I don't know how many of my secrets I need to give out on this live
Fair.
stream. You gotta
Fair,
calm down
yeah.
there. But I mean, at the same time, if anyone wants to try to compete with me, then I guess you can have at it. Good luck.
Right.
I'm just kidding. But no, I actually have some pretty big projects in mind. And this year versus last year I was really focusing on recording as many mature bucks for as long as I possibly could and as much data as possible, and then just piecing it all together into a massive spreadsheet and seeing if anything started to click. That's really kind of the mentality that I went into. This year, I'm going into it more focusing on really individual studies on a pretty decent scale, not massive, but really like true research, like on individual topics. And I'm going to use those as some of them at least for pitches to go out and maybe aim for private funding to be able to fund much larger scale projects on a ridiculously large level. And I do already have some pretty big names involved with me on that in the background that we're working on it with. And so yeah, I won't give too much away with that, but just know that I've this year it's not going to happen on the extreme large scale, but next year there's a pretty good chance that we're going to have some pretty large research coming out. And what I mean by large scale is like across 30 to 40, or not 40, but probably 30 to like 32 states. With multiple pilots in every single state, and they would have an assistant, helping them with the types of projects that we'd be doing. So yeah, no, the research will become even more nerdy as time goes on.
Is there
I'm here for it.
is there like a could you give us just like a summary of the different data points that you're looking for when you say research? Like you're going out to do research. What are things you're actually looking at?
What's the
What
hypothesis?
counts?
What's the hypothesis? Like, what are you trying to prove or disprove?
Well, there's a lot of things that can be proved or disproved by all the data variables that I was documenting. So, I mean, from a basic level, think of pretty much every single weather event that you could document throughout that day, whether it's sunny, cloudy, whatever. I was documenting it. Wind direction, wind speed, all the way throughout the day on an hour-by-hour basis, documenting those. Probably the biggest one that I was documenting was how the deer was moving in coordinates with the thermals in the location, because a little secret hack of this drone is it's a thermal drone, and you can see what's hot and what's cold. So you can see the areas. It's not an exact science, but for the most part, you can see where areas in the timber are really, really cool, and thermals are still just kind of rolling and falling, even in the middle of the day, where if you have the sun kind of hammering those south-facing slopes and those north ones, you can see the north ones are cooler and thermals are still dropping in that area, whereas on the south-facing slopes, they're rising quite obviously. So I was documenting in coordination with where deer were moving in relation to thermals. But kind of the main thing I was doing was beyond all the basic level stuff. And also moon phase. I documented everything related to moon phase for every single day. I actually automated a lot of that stuff in a spreadsheet, so that way it was pulling data consistently throughout the day with, I forget the application I was using, but I digress. Was whenever I would find a deer in the morning, if he was bedding, then that was an event, or if he was moving, then that was an event, but that would be the start of that day, right? And for this reference, we'll just say that he was bedding on this particular day. Then I would document where he was bedding, of course, with his longitude and latitude pin. And then I would document around 26 to 28 variables off of that. So is he on a leeward side of the ridge? Is he on a windward side of the ridge? Is he just kind of on the side of one? Is he in a thermal hub? Kind of that type of stuff. Wind direction, wind speed, all of the type of variables in relation to that. The direction that he's facing in coordination with the wind. And then once all those variables were done and he finally stood up, then I would document kind of that small event whenever he stood up and what he did. And then I would also timestamp everything along the way. And whenever he started moving, then that's a whole new set of 26 to 28 variables that you would redocument, independent of, depending upon wind direction, all this stuff, and the direction that he's moving. And then the larger thing that you can get from whenever he's moving is his net displacement, which would be from the time that he stands to the time that he beds back down, and documenting his net displacement throughout that time frame, and then going back and documenting his yards per hour, so the speed that he was traveling. And then you can take the yards per hour and the net displacement numbers for, say I documented a deer across like 30 days, and I did every single, bed, move, throughout every day for 30 days. Then you can take all those variables and, filter them all down to the bottom and have them automated back to the beginning of the spreadsheet to where it'll show you this particular deer's average yards per hour in the morning versus his average yards per hour in the evening. And here's his net displacement for the morning. Here's his net displacement in the evening. Here's the wind that he generally travels in, in direction with and a percentage rating. It's a pretty ridiculous spreadsheet in the end. So,
and all those points are visible. Everything that you collected last year, is it currently visible, or are you rolling it out right now?
On my spreadsheet.
No. Just on content for people to consume, just for like on your YouTube channel and things like that. Is all of that stuff available right now for people to see it? Like not see the spreadsheet, but see it kind of in action.
Yeah, no, they can see a lot of the stuff in action. There's still some topics that I haven't put out yet.
Cool.
I mean, and in terms of showing my actual spreadsheet, that's a very select few people that are going to actually see it.
He said he's going to send it to us after the podcast. So don't worry about it. We're okay.
Yeah, you guys can piece through the whole thing. And
but
then sell all of the data off to somebody for
10,000 foot view, like Walt's saying. What's the if you could say last year after doing this thing for a year, what is the thing that you really like? Holy crap! This is brand new. This is new research, or this is amazing data right here.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you can point out immediately?
Yeah, probably the newest thing. There's a couple, but the newest thing would be. Whenever I started noticing deer were standing up in the evening, that it was, and I don't particularly know that thermals were actually switching in that area. And one other thing about thermals switching that needs to be mentioned is the fact that whenever they do finally switch, so say it's in the evening time frame and they're rising throughout the day in this particular area where that deer's at, then the temperature kind of peaks out, sun goes down, shade starts kind of kicking in a little bit, and the thermals start to switch in theory. Then it's actually more of a swirling effect that takes place for quite a long period of time. And it's not as if it's rising and then all of a sudden the sun goes away and now everything's straight down. It's going to be swirling for quite a long time. And what I was noticing, and it was kind of funny that it correlated so well with my weather app on my phone, but you could just look at whenever the weather was peaking for the top of that day, say it was going to peak at like 45 degrees, and then it immediately, late in the evening it started and it showed that it was going to drop to like 43. Within 10 to 15 minutes of that peak temperature, mature bucks were just standing up. And that doesn't particularly mean that they were standing up and moving off and kind of going about their day in their pattern, but sometimes they would just stand up and kind of ruminate in an area or clean themselves or whatever and just kind of browse around in their bedding area for 15 to 30 minutes. But the interesting part was that at that peak temperature, oftentimes it was within 5 minutes on either side of whenever my app was, just the standard weather app on my iPhone was showing me the temperature was peaking, he would just stand up. And it was like, huh, this is pretty. And I pieced that one together pretty quick just by, documenting weather, temperature and everything, and bedding and movement frequency. And then whenever I would timestamp stuff, then after a few days, or after, I think it was 2 weeks really, then I noticed like, oh crap, like these mature, especially mature bucks, they're standing up extremely frequent with the thermal switching. And like I said, it doesn't particularly mean that they're moving at that time frame. That just means that's whenever they get on their feet, which was pretty cool.
And I'm sure sometimes moving, right? Like that's when they get on their feet, they adjust, they move, and that's like as far as hunting strategy is concerned, being close into bedding areas. That's a great piece of knowledge that's been, a lot of people who hunt in thickets, hunt inside of bedding areas, can tell you like, there's times of the day that the deer just get on their feet, and they might not leave a small area, but they are on their feet.
Yeah.
So that's cool. That's really neat.
Yeah, and another thing, I think I've got 2 more that are really cool, but it was actually another one that I mentioned in that first video, but I have a continuation on from it because I've thought about it harder since I made that first video, and it has to do with wind shifting. And technically, I did record probably the first wind shifting event with a thermal drone. I know people have seen wind shifting, bucks moving off of the wind shifting in theory, like out in kind of open country a little bit more in particular, but whenever I recorded that event, the first time I saw it, by the way, is I freaked out. Like I was it was kind of raining a little bit that day, kind of misting, so I could see the wind direction where he was bedding, and I watched it wrap from like a south, kind of start off to a little bit of a west, and right whenever it hit like a complete west wind, he stood up and started moving. I was like, that's pretty interesting. But I remember texting my wife and freaking out. Like he actually got up whenever I thought he was going to, and it was in the middle of the day, and but anyways, deer do move with the wind shifting in the middle of the day pretty consistently from what I'd seen, especially mature bucks. But the thing that I believe, and I have no way of proving this, but this is my belief system on this, is that I don't think they're moving with the wind shifting to give themselves as much of an advantage with their bedding location for that wind, if that makes sense. So like if he's bedded in, I'll give this example because I'd seen it so many times. If he's bedded on a windward side of the ridge with a south wind, and he's kind of in a thermal hub, so that's why he's there. He's not there because of the south wind. He's there because he's in a thermal hub, and wind's blowing 3-4 miles per hour. And then the wind wraps all the way around to a north wind, and now it's blowing 15 miles per hour. Then he would get up, and I'd seen this one particular deer do it 2 times, where he moved around 1,200 yards and repositioned himself completely for that north wind and that cold front that had moved in. And I think that they reposition themselves on a wind shift based off of where they want to be that evening. It's not so much repositioning themselves for a better bedding location as it is to reposition themselves for their evening movement that's about to take place, if that makes sense.
How did you figure that out? Like what makes you figure that?
Just from watching them enough to kind of piece together, because really what I was noticing was wind direction doesn't play near as important of a role as I had thought in the beginning. A lot of the things with deer bedding on the leeward side of the ridge and whatnot. And I remember the first time I saw a buck, he was bedding on the windward side of a ridge. It was 25 mile per hour winds, and it was spitting ice, like hard. And he was facing the storm on the windward side of the ridge, just getting battered by ice. And whenever I saw that, I just kind of like took all the information that you thought you knew about like bedding on the leeward side of the ridge and threw it out the window. It's like, that doesn't make any sense. I have no idea what this buck is doing. And then I flew to another one and he was on the windward side of the ridge. And then I flew to another one and he was on the leeward side of the ridge. And it's like, okay, they're just bedding all over the place. And there was no correlation in relation to wind that often. And that's kind of my belief on that as well, was that he was because in theory, this one buck, and I'd seen it multiple other times, I have other examples where they're bedded on a south-facing slope with a south wind, so they're already on a windward side, and then the wind wraps around to a north-facing wind, they would have been on the leeward side. Why did he move into a complete different direction whenever he was already in a thermal hub on the windward side of that ridge? What caused him to get up and make that move? Because he was in such a perfect spot. And I think it's because he knew where he wanted to be that evening with the current conditions that he had. And whenever those conditions changed, he realized that location wasn't going to work anymore. So he had to get up and relocate.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, so he was, it's almost like, oh, screwed this one up. I need to change to the. I need to change my plan up a little bit.
Yeah, because he doesn't have a weather app, so
right.
He can't tell that there's a wind shift. He just has to feel it and then realize like, oh, okay.
That's validating, dude. It's super validating. I can remember back, years ago. It may have even been Southern Ground. I said something like, I think a wind shift is one of the best times to kill a deer, to kill a buck, and I've just seen it too much, man. I've seen it too much, and I've also seen guys not hunt on wind shifts because they can't be bulletproof as they want, right?
Yeah.
And so you're like, it's a risky move, but it can be a very beneficial move because, as your research seems to back it up, like that's a good time to be in the woods. It's a good time to be close, especially if you know where a big buck lives, if you know his core area.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and sometimes I'd only seen them versus like that example I'd given where a deer was moving over 1,000 yards in some cases in the middle of the day. Some cases I've seen where a deer just drops down into a ditch and beds on the other side of the ditch. And it's like, but it didn't, once again, it didn't seem like it was correlating with wind direction. He just dropped and he moved 50 to 100 yards in the end, bedded back down, and he was done. And it was like, okay, well, he still moved off of it. There's a reason for that, but it's just kind of interesting. So, yeah, I guess I had one more. It was in relation to the morning, but I feel like it slipped my brain.
Well, to that point, Derrick, talking about morning, Kyle has a pretty good question on here. Walt, can you put that up there? I don't have.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I was holding on to that, but that if you go ahead.
Well, it has to do. People want to know what the morning movement is like. Can you see that, Derrick? Can you read that? It says
trying to
with net displacement for. Can you put that? Or I guess I can read it
I got
for
you.
podcast people. With net displacement being greater in the mornings, what's the average distance mature bucks travel in the daylight to their first bed in the morning, and does temperature affect this distance?
Yeah, I don't have a statistic that shows that temperature is making much of a difference in that realm. But the one thing I would say, and that's actually, it's kind of interesting that he asked that, because that has to do with the third topic that I was going to bring up, was how far mature bucks travel into the morning. Because kind of growing up, the traditionalist belief was kind of go out early in the morning, hunt kind of right as sun comes up and whatnot, and then 8 a.m., 8:30 a.m. A lot of guys where I was hunting out, they're like, oh, I'm done, I'm getting down, and I was seeing mature bucks move throughout daylight all the way into like 9, 9:30, 10, some cases 10:30 a.m. And the other interesting part about that I've seen was oftentimes, and this could just be a location-specific thing, and I would love to go out to other places and do this, but whenever bucks were hitting scrapes in the middle of the day, they were doing it at the end of that morning travel route. Every once in a while, I would see one kind of hit a scrape, not rubs, scrapes. I would see rubs, they just make them all the freaking time. But scrapes, every once in a while, I would see them kind of stop in the middle of a morning travel route and hit one, but it almost seemed as if where they were bedded in the morning, whenever they got up, they had a predetermined notion how they were going to travel that day and where they were going. And when they made it to their end location, they would go out and they would make their scrapes. Maybe there's 1, 2, sometimes 3 in one location, around a field edge or kind of down off in a staging area. And then he would move from that scrape location back down to his bed. And the reason that I found it fascinating how late some deer move into the morning was, I think there's some guys out there that kill a buck like at 10:30 a.m. or something, maybe hunting nearby one of these scrapes in some cases, and they think that they killed one that was moving in the middle of the day, like, oh, I killed a midday move or something in that relation, when in reality he never bedded down. You caught him on the tail end of his movement for that morning travel route, and it wasn't a midday movement. It was just he just hadn't finished his route yet. So,
and that has to do with thermals too, correct? Like that's when the thermal switch starts to rise. That's when they start that travel route. Is that kind of what you're talking about? And then,
well, in the morning, I mean, there's a lot of variables that can come into play in the morning, because you have the sun rising in the east, so east-facing slopes are going to start kind of heating up first, and west-facing slopes are going to be a lot cooler, and they're going to be dropping still. And there's the topic on thermals is actually, I'm going to continue to joke. I've already joked about it a lot in videos, but I'm going to continue to do so, and on every podcast I go on, that I will bring a video out someday on thermals, and it's going to be like a 30 to 45 minute video, and it's just going to be a complete nerd fest. And but the idea of it is it's actually going to focus on the real science behind what's happening. So it'll be 15 minutes of just nerdy science-based stuff to explain what is actually occurring here, because I think thermals have become watered down in the hunting community a little bit too much. It started with the whole,
Thanks, Parker.
they rise in the morning and they fall in the evening, and then you started getting people that realized, well, really, they're swirling in some areas, and in some cases they fall all day long in these areas, and there's actually still some more to it beyond that a little bit that I'd like to bring to light, but we'll see. It's going to be a big video, and it takes a lot of motion graphics. That's a problem. So.
Motion graphics suck.
I'm
as
curious
bad as
on
swirling
that,
winds.
on that topic. How often did you see rut removed from the scenario? Right. How often did you see deer or mature bucks find a location and then move after shooting light? Right. So. What I see a lot is I'll get, especially down here, bucks on camera, hour before daylight. All the cameras are quiet after that. And then sometime between like 10:45 and 1, there's this other movement pattern that happens, right? Yeah. Earlier you were saying, I think what I heard you saying was that was the end of a travel pattern. But were there instances or any kind of noticeable pattern of bucks getting up midday and moving that kind of disrupt that previous observation?
Yeah, I'd seen it happen in the pre-rut and very shortly, for a very short time during the post-rut. And I'd actually only seen it in one particular deer, and the other deer I'd never seen it at all. So I don't know if that's an individual characteristic or type of behavioral trait, or maybe I just only had one buck that was, I don't really know. But I did see it where every once in a while, especially in that pre-rut and post-rut time frame, they would every once in a while get up and continue to make a move. But oftentimes those moves, they weren't too far. And in most cases, whenever they were making one of those movements, it was actually caused by something. So in some cases I'd seen where it wasn't this one buck that I'd observed do it. Maybe a coyote came running in through that area, and he decided to get up and kind of bump out of the location. More often than not, though, it was actually a group of does moving by or young bucks moving in. So in a situation where you had a group of does moving by, and he could see them or hear them off 100 and 150 yards to the timber, then he would get up and move from that location, and he wouldn't walk downwind of them, he wouldn't walk right up to them, he would walk to where he had just seen them walk through to scent check the ground as to where they were walking. And he would kind of walk in that area and scent check the ground 50, 75 yards behind where the does already were now, and just kind of check out where these does were at in terms of estrus. And then he would kind of walk around, maybe browse for a little bit longer, 15 minutes, and bed back down. I saw that a lot. And in some instances, I also saw where, especially with dominant mature bucks, younger bucks would move in on him to his location. They would kind of find him and then bump him out of his bed, and then he'd kind of start pinning his ears back and be like, get the crap away from me. It's like so he'd kind of get annoyed with them. But that would cause him to stand prematurely, a little bit early, where I don't think he normally otherwise would have. And then he'd kind of move around for 50 yards to 100 yards and bed back down. So
the conclusion, what I'm taking from that is, once that buck is in his bed for the day, aside from these switches, like you said, that were very predictable, wherein the day's heat or cold hit its peak, outside of that, he is locked down. He just was not moving any great distance.
Yeah, from what I was seeing. Yeah.
That's interesting. I think that validates a lot of people's observations. And I'm going to ask this for one of our compatriots who's not here, did that daylight movement ever show any correlation with moon phase? Did you see any kind of change in how late they were coming back or anything like that?
Yeah, no, I did not. And I think that's across the board for GPS color studies as well, that it just, at the moment, there's not a significant variation between the two yet, or between moon phases and deer movement. And from a hunter's perspective, it makes complete sense that it should have an effect. Like I can't imagine that it doesn't, but at the moment, the numbers suggest that it doesn't have an effect. So
it's just crazy, man. And maybe it's just we go in the woods when the moon phase is best. I don't think that's it for me, but I do. I mean, I tend to see it with my eyes, you know what I mean? In the woods when I'm hunting, it's like, oh, well, it's a good moon phase, and they moved right when it said it would, and whatever. I don't know what it is, man, but I know that the science doesn't back it up. I know the research doesn't back it up so far, but it does seem like It seems like
no,
it's
I mean,
gotta be something.
I agree. That's why I said from like a hunter's perspective, it makes complete sense as to why it should work. It's just the numbers have never shown a large enough variation that you can say definitively, like, yes, it has a massive, like it has an impact. So,
Jake has a good question there, Walter.
yep.
That has to do with when you're talking about bucks getting bumped out of their beds. How often did you see a buck get bumped by a hunter and that same buck come back to the area in shooting light? And how long did it take for him to get back to that area? So bump and dumps.
Yeah.
How often did you see that with your research?
Yeah. Well, oftentimes it wasn't on public land, right? So it was on private. So I was the one doing the bumping. I
Yeah.
would locate a mature buck, and then I would either. I had a couple different studies that I've done, and videos will come out on this topic at some point whenever I can finish them. But where I would go intentionally downwind of him, or basically give him my wind, and kind of continue to walk closer to his location until he would pick me up, and then that way he knew I was human, and then he would run away. And then in some situations, I would try to move in on him from where I had a wind advantage, and that way he would see and hear that there was something there, but he wasn't able to pick up that I was human, to see if there was any variation between those two. Because I've always felt like if they could pick up a human scent and know for a fact that that was a person, then they're going to be gone for a little bit longer. And I haven't seen a correlation with that yet either. But to answer his question, in terms of going in and intentionally bumping a buck up, it actually matches almost perfectly, ironically, with GPS color studies, where if you go in and you bump a deer out of a location, at least in my area, they're running 150 to 300 yards away from you, and then they stand, and this is the part that I was able to observe that GPS colors couldn't, is they just kind of stand and they stare back in the location where the event had just taken place for 30 minutes, in some case an hour. And they'll just stand and literally will not move a muscle in that location. And then all of a sudden, it's as if everything's fine. And they just cool back down, go back to browsing, nothing ever happened. Like whatever it is
Really?
isn't following them. And it's as if they realize like they're safe and their home base worked the way that it should have. So they're good to go. And from that moment on, I had definitely seen them move right back through that area where I had just bumped them from, because it's their home range. And if you think about it from that perspective, like they trust this, especially a mature dominant buck that has lived to that level and he's been in this area for so long. If you bump him out of that core area, it makes sense that he trusts that area. And in from the other perspective of that, I think in some cases those deer, and this could be an individual characteristic where maybe they're not moving in the home range because they feel as comfortable, but they're moving back in because they're curious, potentially. Like, that's my house type thing, and I'm just going to I'm going to go gain a little bit of an advantage and move back into this little home range and see, is human still there, potentially? But oftentimes it was a wide range. Sometimes they wouldn't move back in for an hour and a half. Sometimes they wouldn't move back in for 10 hours. So.
But we're still talking like that same day?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, no, they were definitely coming back in that day. Yeah.
Did you see them coming in downwind? Were they being real cautious coming back in, or?
I'd seen it a few times. I think more than anything, the areas where they were bedding, they were oftentimes kind of positioned in a little bit of an area that was a thermal hub, so they had more of a thermal advantage than anything in that location when moving back in. It really wasn't wind dictated as much as it was thermals. Yeah.
Yeah. So they had the advantage already, basically.
Yeah.
Once
correct.
they moved back in there, they could catch scent from everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yep.
That's wicked.
It's fascinating, but it's also again validating, right? Because you see these things and you think these things because you see it, and it's nice to hear it. You know, to me it inspires a ton of confidence, man. I've said for a long time, and I know a lot of guys. This isn't just me. A lot of guys have said this for a long time. Seeing a deer get up out of a bed is about one of the best walk-ins that you can do. You know, like it's a good way to walk in the woods because he's probably going to be back.
Yeah. Yeah, and I one thing worth noting is I didn't go in and bump these deer like a lot. I'd done it like on an individual buck. I think the most I'd ever done it to one was maybe 3 or 4 times. But I had quite a few subjects that I could do it on different properties as well. But I feel like if you went into his home range, like in a 7-day period, 6 times, you're probably going to start making an impact. Like he might start moving away. But I think even if he did move away and find a new location for 5 to 7 days, I feel like he'd move back in anyways. I feel like a mature buck is that confident in his ability, and especially if you think about it in terms of the late season, because late season they're a lot more dependent, especially in the Midwest, they're a lot more dependent on their food sources and kind of how selective they are with their home range at that time frame, where it's going to meet all of their nutritional needs and their safety needs and everything. And they probably have been using this area for quite a while. And if you bump one out of their late season bed and they have to move off, I would garner they're going to come back even quicker in that case, because that location can 100% in their brain keep them alive throughout winter, and they're not going to go try to retool and find a completely new home range just because a human was in there once or twice. So
That's
Good
fascinating.
stuff.
That's
That
all I
is,
got.
if somebody cannot draw some conclusions to help your deer hunting from this research, like, you need to listen to it again, because that's
Parker,
good stuff.
Kind of speculating here, but as the public land guy on the podcast, I'm going to throw this to you. You know, he said that late season, and this is kind of what I heard, so you let me know what you think about it. But he said that late season spot is going to be bulletproof for him because it's secure on heavily pressured public land. Would a mature buck, if you found a mature buck in a spot on heavily pressured public land, would you kind of be able to treat it similarly as if it was a late season, low leaf, low stem count kind of safe haven kind of thing? I guess what
Are
I'm
you
getting at
saying
is,
like outside of the late season?
yeah, because like if you have an area that's so heavily pressured that he finds a space that he feels secure, does that then early season, mid season, does that suddenly become? Can you take what Derrick has said there about late season and maybe extrapolate that to be actionable?
I mean, I think the best thing somebody can do, I've thought this for a long time in the late season, is to bump a deer up, right? Like bump a deer up or give him food if you're on private land, right? And so find those food sources on public. I don't mean this in any way, Derrick, and I hope this answers your question, Walt. You are validating the things that I've felt, right? Like it doesn't. It's nice to hear it's like, okay, I'm on the money. Like I'm doing something right. I'm learning something correct. And I think a lot of guys are going to find themselves in that position. And I certainly hope that I don't always feel that way. I hope at some point, like, I can't wait to go watch these videos. And I got to admit, I haven't watched any of them yet. I've certainly seen your name pop up and I've seen your stuff pop up, and I can't wait to go watch
I'm
it.
leaving this live stream then.
Yeah, get out of here, bro. No, I'm. It's pretty validating. I would say. That's it. I think it's.
But you're the
it's
perfect
awesome.
hunter, though. So
No, I'm not.
I'm just
I'm not. If you were an archery coach, we would be talking about all of my problems right now. Like,
yeah.
but no, I think
for
it's
the-
great. It's really good research, man, and it's like, I think it should inspire confidence in people.
Yeah. Yeah, and for what Walter was talking about earlier as to whether or not it's applicable, like kind of all the way across the season, for a heavily pressured area, I mean, it would be fun to try that out and see whether or not it is. I almost wonder, though, in a situation on heavily pressured public land, if a mature buck, it's interesting that mature bucks are even hardly on heavily pressured land, but if they're almost not in like kind of survival mode from bedding location to bedding location, I guess it depends on what heavily pressured is. Is that like heavily pressured Missouri rifle season, or is that like heavily pressured 15 guys walking it with a bow? Because if it's heavily pressured Missouri rifle season, deer are 100% in survival mode in that situation. They're just trying to make it from alive that morning to alive that evening, and try to find a bedding location where they're at. So, but yeah, no, I'd like to think that would potentially be applicable for you guys down there.
The hardest part about heavily pressured public land is not necessarily, I don't think that it's going to move deer away. It's just people kill deer, right? When it's heavily pressured, people kill them. And I think in what I've seen, in Kentucky, the place that we hunt in Kentucky, a lot of bucks there. There's a ton of bucks. And if you run cameras there, you kind of see what bucks do and how they survive and how they but they stay there through all of the pressure. They just coexist, man. They just go and hide and they don't move. They do what you said. They run and they stand there until they know everything's safe, or they bed down again, or they hide. It's just what they do. They coexist and they do it well. But also in that, your target buck might disappear because it's heavily pressured land and he might get killed, and so it's like, that's kind of the only thing that that's hugely impactful, in my opinion, on public land is people just kill the deer.
So I'm curious, Derek, what's one of the things that you went in as a hunter with your hunter mindset on, and you're like, this is gonna prove to Uncle Johnny that I was right, and it turned out you were just completely wrong about?
Oh,
Yeah.
that's a good question, Walt.
Yeah, that is a good question. Because a lot of the old guys, they're pretty savvy hunters where I'm at. But yeah, I probably this would just be really particular for that property. This isn't as applicable for everybody else, but more so how deer were moving about the terrain on that property, and which particular funnels they were willing to travel and which ones they weren't willing to travel. Because there were some where they looked like on topography, they just looked like these dynamite locations, and then you just never see a deer walk through it at all. In fact, in most cases, you never see a deer within 50 yards of either side of that funnel. And it's like, it's pretty interesting. And then there's some that like weren't really as obvious at first. They were funnels. And the more you start piecing together terrain features and little 8-foot cliffs that are running down the ridge system and everything, you realize like, oh, wow, this is a really, really nice funnel, and it's effective. And it's also the most efficient route of travel for a mature buck to take in that case, if he's wanting to scent check as many does as he possibly can. And you start seeing that, and that's probably the number one thing for me. But it might not be. I guess the invisible or the funnels side of thing could be pretty applicable for a lot of people. But in terms of how deer were traveling this particular terrain, it doesn't. Yeah, that doesn't apply for a lot of people. So
You're talking about you're talking almost like a maze, like having a little bit. I think when we look at spots, we look at a specific feature and say, oh, that specific feature looks good. And you're saying it's a little more spread out than that. It's connect the dots. This funnel to this funnel to this funnel to this funnel to this funnel.
Yeah, and if you'd watched my invisible funnel video, then you'd probably know a lot about what I'm talking about. But Parker hasn't, so Walter knows everything that I've talked about so far. So me and Walter are going to finish this live stream here, and you can just No, one of the things that I started noticing though, like to what you just said, is that I was utilizing LiDAR, all the new LiDAR technology and stuff that's out, and in particular TerrainX from Onyx, and kind of shading areas and finding locations, which a lot of these are already pre-existingly known on this property. I just went back on topography and kind of mapped them for fun. And then I started doing it across the board on other properties, and everything started adding up, and it was like, oh crap, like you can do an insane amount of preseason scouting on topography in terms of mapping these really in the most important thing that I was finding, and this isn't a terrain feature that a lot of places are going to have, but this particular property, the main one that I was researching, it has these little, like I said, 5 to 8 foot cliffs that just run the insides of these ridges. And white-tailed deer can't travel up those, but if you're not marking those on topography, then you're not going to really think about them as much as you potentially could. And if you go in and you find a way to map every single piece of impassable terrain on the property that you're hunting, and then you zoom back out, then you'll really start to realize pretty fast, like, oh crap, these deer, they have to travel. Like, there's no if and or buts about it. They are forced to travel in these particular areas. And even if that funnel, a lot of times whenever I was growing up, I'd start to piece together a funnel in my mind as like something that's super tight, like 30, 50 yards. But in my brain now, it's like a funnel can be 200 yards wide. But like whatever forces deer to travel through this particular area, and they literally have no other options. Like, they have to go to that. To me, that's a funnel, even if it's 200 yards wide, because you can start utilizing that to your advantage and hunting that 200 yard wide funnel, and then start hunt it as safe as possible in the beginning, unless you're only going to be hunting for a couple days, and then start narrowing down where the deer are actually traveling in that location and positioning yourself in a better in a better spot to get a shot on a buck. But yeah, that's kind of where that whole stemmed to. So
that's super cool.
Watch the video on it.
It's a neat way to scout too, especially with the LiDAR. I know Onyx just got LiDAR on the desktop feature, and that's been a pretty sweet feature. I know Spartan Forge has had it for a little while. Yeah. And I hunt a lot of hill country stuff, and so bluffs and walls and things like that are pretty, I wouldn't say they're prevalent, but they're definitely there. Would you say in your research, just kind of keeping in that and staying in that same vein, they use more bluffs for travel or bedding? Because I've seen them do both. What would you say was the most like?
Yeah.
A lot of times when I get up next to a bluff wall, I'm like, oh crap, this could be really good bedding.
Yeah. I've probably seen pretty even across the board on that. I don't really have one leaning the other way. Yeah, the bedding locations thing, that's a weird one, because if you start throwing does and everything into the equation, then it gets really weird. But mature bucks in particular, I wasn't finding them bed that close to bluffs too often.
Yeah.
I'm not 100% sure why. You could potentially lean it to the fact that that's just one less escape route that they have at that time. That is also one other area that danger can't come from in that facet of the mind. But I think that they really like to position themselves, and especially in the type of terrain that I was looking at, in areas where they just have a thermal advantage from everywhere around them at all times. And they have multiple escape routes that they can take. That's kind of from what I've seen. And in terms of the movement, I'd seen some situations where maybe there was a chance that whenever mature bucks were traveling across terrain, they would walk until they hit a terrain feature like that. Kind of similar to how if a deer is moving through a clear cut, and you can pretty much play like connect the dots with the pine trees that are sticking up out of the clear cut, and that's kind of how they travel through a clear cut, kind of connecting those dots all the way through it. Similar to that, whereas they're not walking on the same trail every single time. They're just walking through this big section of timber until they hit a terrain feature that is recognizable. And in some cases, I've seen it where I think that it's been a bluff or a cliff or something, and when they make it to that area, then it's as if like they kind of retool their mind as to like, oh, okay, here's where I'm at, and then they start moving based off of that. That's something that I've potentially seen. I've definitely seen that topic in coordination with habitat diversity and kind of habitat edges where there's like a clear cut mature timber or mature timbered field edges, stuff like that, where they walk kind of a random path towards that direction, and as soon as they hit, especially a clear cut and mature timber, as soon as they hit it, then it's as if like, oh, okay, here I am, and then they turn and they walk around that clear cut edge. But
wow, that's pretty cool. That's neat
Yeah.
research. There's a good question up there, Walt.
Yep.
Is the home range of a mature buck what we think it is, roughly a square mile?
Yeah, it's highly dependent upon season for one. Buck's home range is different in the summer, and then some's different in the fall, and then some have a different home range in the winter as well. But it's also highly individualistic, and this is across the board for GPS color studies as well. You can have one mature buck that has a core home range of 80 acres, and you can have another that has a core home range of 1,500 acres in some cases. So roughly 1 square mile, I guess you could say that. I would garner to say that it's highly individual though, dependent upon the buck and also time of season. But more than anything, it's morely based off of that individual buck's characteristics and just kind of how he decides to live out his life. Because I've seen some that are a lot more sedentary, and they live in those really tight, restricted home ranges. And then there's others that are just lunatics, and they walk all over the place every single day. So
I grew up in West Texas, and the one thing in Texas is you got a lot of high fence ranches, and within a lot of high fence ranches, they kind of get to know deer. That's just kind of how hunting is there. They know which deer are what, but you always hear about the ones that are like, yeah, dude, I mean, we have a 5,000 acres, fenced in area, and there's bucks that we don't know that are here that just are not social. They don't show up. They don't come to the feeders.
Yeah.
They just kind of recluse. I'm sure you've seen that. Like, it's just, that's what it sounds like. Some of them are just different.
Yeah.
Some of them are social. Some of them aren't.
Yeah, and that, I mean, even going into the late season in terms of their aggressive and kind of their behavior and the way they act that way in terms of rutting. I'd had some bucks where they're traveling, 1,000 yards per hour and these massive distances in a mile and a half, almost 2 miles in some cases, on a morning travel route, where you have another buck that's just maybe half a mile south of him, and he gets out of his bed and he just kind of browses around and he eats on acorns and beds back down, and he's not really that, he doesn't really care about does and estrus, but he's quite clearly, I mean, one of them, he's about 160-inch 5x6, just 6-year-old monster, just one of the most dominant bucks in the area, and he is just this highly sedentary, super calm, laid back, never pinned his ears back, was never aggressive towards any other deer. And actually, I'd seen him interact with one of these other deer. That was, if you'd watched my videos, you know, he was a mainframe 10, and I called him Winter, and he was an extremely aggressive buck. And they had both made it within 15 yards of one another. And Winter, I've never seen him fight another deer. And whenever I saw these two get within range of each other, it's like, holy crap, something's going to go down. But Winter has a really bad limp, and actually this other deer did as well. And they got pretty close. And the 6x5, he was pretty curious in him, and he was kind of dipping his head and checking him out. He was a lot more cautious of Winter, the mainframe 10, than Winter was of him. And the mainframe 10, he had kind of walked maybe 5 to 7 yards closer towards the 6x5. 6x5 tucked his tail and just bounced out of the way. And it was like, that didn't make any sense, because the 6x5, he was bigger deer. I mean, he was healthier at that time frame. But he clearly knew that this deer is a lunatic. He's putting in the miles every single day.
He's unhinged.
He's gonna kick my butt if I attempt to get in his, like, absolutely not. That deer had some street cred or something, because he was a bad son of a gun, apparently.
What was
That's
the first
wild.
fight? The first fight I ever saw was like that. It was a very similar fight. It was like, what are you doing? What's that small buck doing, beating up on the bigger buck?
Yeah.
Someone just
We see it with
bullies,
turkeys too. Like you'll see a Jake just beat the crap out of a monster gobbler, and it's just like,
Yeah.
well, that doesn't make any sense.
Well, this particular event wasn't like a Jake taking on a gobbler. This was two dominants taking on each other, and because when you watch my videos, you'll see the mainframe 10. I mean, he's a freaking stud, but he wasn't as healthy at that time frame as the 6x5 was. So
Yeah, that's cool. I'm really curious. I want to backtrack just a touch. I know we're running close on time, but one of the most interesting things that I've heard you say so far was talking about landmarks and like their travel paths. You mentioned pine trees and clear cuts, and maybe you have even some specific examples of this. But that's I want to say I heard Shane Simpson say this one time in a video. May have been even in Nebraska. That sounds right. He may have been in Nebraska or something like that. It was an opener. He was in the middle of a big, wide open area with one tree, and he mentioned something about, I just feel like this tree is going to be a landmark in this wide open space, that every deer is going to eventually walk by this tree because it's the only tree here. That stuck with me whenever he said it, and it sounds like your research backs that up.
Yeah, and I think it depends also upon, like what's that terrain or what's the habitat like in that area. If it's up over their head, and you have to think about it from the perspective of place yourself in that deer's kind of hooves in that case, in that situation, and try to get through that clear cut as efficiently and as quickly as you can. And you can either just lower your head and walk through it, and good luck, you'll make it to the other side at some point, or you can lift your head and you can look up and you can start picking out landmarks. And in this case, in most clear cuts, the most obvious things are going to be those tallest trees. In my case, they're pine trees. And you can oftentimes go directly to those pine trees, and there's going to be quite a few rubs, signpost rubs and everything, and then there's going to be potentially a scrape right around that area, almost all the time, in my case at least. So that's definitely a thing, and especially more than anything that I've seen is the fact of walking and kind of meandering, not on a main trail, not on, like, I have multiple instances of this one particular mature buck walking up like a 200, actually that's why I talked about the 200 yard wide funnel. He was walking up this 200 yard wide kind of ridge system, and he would never walk up it on the same exact path. He's just kind of all over the place in terms of my pins and everything that I've mapped on it. Hit my laptop. And but every single time he would walk all the way until he made it within 15 to 20 yards of that clear cut, and then he would stop and he would make a move based off of that. So he'd either kind of wrap to the north side or back down to the south side. But he was always walking till he hit that edge. And once he made that edge, then he was going to make a decision how he was going to move based off of that. So
Interesting. Kyle just made another great comment. We were talking about landmarks. He's heard Dan Infault talk about this in marsh habitat, where all they can see is one lone tree ahead of them. I mean, if you think about what a deer sees, like, it makes sense that something that breaks up the horizon in front of them, it becomes a landmark, because they've got very little in the way of depth perception. So the whole world probably looks, with the exception of smells, probably looks remarkably monotonous to a whitetail, right? I mean, I think that's one of the reasons why in marsh habitat you also see these like beat down trails, because a beat down trail probably is just, as they walk it, it's probably just easier to perceive it for them as they're going.
That's
And so,
cattails, man. If you've
yeah.
ever been up to Michigan, North Dakota, a lot of those states up there, they've got cattail marshes, and that stuff is like but it's very similar to a clear cut. I remember being there and thinking, I got to hunt this similar to the way I would a clear cut, or like young planted pines, like just so monotonous. But every once in a while you'll find a lone oak tree or a big, uh, you know, what is not hickory, sycamore or something like that, growing in those, and it's climbable, right? And you can hunt it, and I've heard that a lot. And you talked about scrapes. I was just in Kentucky this past weekend hunting like a scrubby oak. It was real scrubby oaks, but there'd be like two big trees sticking up, and there's old scrapes under every single one of those. Just confirming exactly what you said. Like that's where they put their
Yep.
sign, because that's just the landmark where they go by.
Yep.
This is good. Talking about water, and we may only have time for just this one more question. But Jake put this question here: how often did you see deer go to an actual water source like a creek or a pond? I'm always wondering how often, and how far they'll go to actual water. Did you? And also, I'll add this on. Did you notice any consistency in the type of water source that they went to?
Yeah. Well, that's kind of also dependent upon what types of water source you have. So
Sure, yeah.
if all you have are ponds, then they're probably going to be going to ponds. If you're in a drought and there's no running water in the creek, then all they're going to be doing is going to ponds. And I think we were talking about that at the beginning earlier before the live stream, and EHD and why EHD is such a problem when in drought season in these areas where there's no running water anymore because you don't have any rain. But kicking back to last season, most on the main property that I did, I think I did 60 to 65% of my research on it. There were a lot of ponds, and they're kind of sporadically spaced out across the area. The interesting thing that I noticed that really correlated with going to ponds, and yes, I did record them drinking out of water, drinking at the ponds. But the more interesting thing that I was seeing was oftentimes in particular, the end of their morning travel route. Like I'd said earlier, I was seeing them make scrapes kind of at the end of that travel route, whether it was 9:30 a.m. or 10:30 a.m. Oftentimes there was a pond pretty close by, and in some cases, the scrapes that were being made were actually on the back side of the pond bank, up against the timber edge, the wood edge. And in those instances, they would almost always either get a drink before they would make a scrape or right after they'd make a scrape, and they'd go back and bed down, which I'd seen pretty consistently. But that could also be just this property thing. I mean, that's not I need more properties that have variable types of, because this property you could bed down almost anywhere and be within 350 yards of water. So I can't take that information and come back to everyone and be like, yeah, they almost always bed 275 yards from water, because you're almost always going to be within that range on this particular property. And then some of the other ones that I'd researched, they had rivers running through them. So there's that, and that's a pretty easy water source for them to almost always have accessibility to. And the other one was one of the other ones was an ag property, and there were two ponds on it, but those ponds were positioned back near the timber, away from the ag, and they're near their bedding areas, so they could go get up out of their bed at any point and go and drink from those water sources. So really, to be able to answer that question accurately, I'd need to be able to do a lot more research across variable types of properties that have less water sources, etc. So.
Did that have to do with the thermal advantage as well that you were seeing on these particular properties? Is all the ponds? I mean, I would think it does.
I would think so.
Yeah.
I haven't gone in and studied that to try to make a direct correlation, just because, like I said, in general, the pond, I haven't made a massive connection with the ponds. I mean, the easiest thing to say is that they're going to start hitting water a little bit sooner whenever acorns start dropping in your area, especially if you're in the Midwest, because their microbiome is going to be changing everything inside of their rumen, so that way they can start processing their new type of heavy mass browse. And in that situation, they're going to be going out and seeking water. But that's kind of common hunting knowledge in that case. So.
Good
So
stuff.
my last question for you is: have you done any work in like cattails or marshy habitats, or has it all been kind of more hilly oak?
Yeah, pretty much hill country, kind of oak trees and everything, and then a little bit of agriculture, and then a couple of properties that have large kind of scenic rivers that run through them. Okay. But this season, I will be going down to the Mississippi Delta area quite a few times. And then I might do some more stuff in Alabama, kind of in the disgusting pine thickets that are out there. I hate that terrain. And then maybe go out towards some normal flatter, less diversity type agriculture type properties as well. So
well, the reason why I ask is purely selfishness. You know, we've got a lot of swamps around here. We've got a lot of thickets. The pine, those nasty pine thickets that you just talked about. I mean, that is Florida. That is the entire. You have beach, and then you have that, right? And so for me, like what I'm really eager to see is kind of in the deep South, the dirty South, right? Like not even like where Parker's at, where it's very much. It feels like you're kind of in like the Ozarks at times. I got this picture of my phone, and it's like if you didn't tell me it was Alabama, I'd be like that could be any lake that I saw on Ozarks, right? And so, but like there's no body of evidence down here for like how that habitat changes things, and everybody's got their different theory, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what you start seeing in those pine thickets and those monotonous, because I kind of treat them like big woods country where there's almost nothing to differentiate, so you find what's those little pockets of something unique, and then suddenly everything fixate on that. So
one thing, I was actually just down in Alabama with the Southern Outdoorsman guys, and on that podcast we talked a lot about habitat diversity. And then we went out and we flew one of their hunting clubs, which was just a disgusting pine thicket. But they had some old existing clear cuts throughout there, and some areas where they'd done controlled burns. And I'd talked so much about habitat diversity on their podcast. And whenever I flew up, the 3 mature bucks that we found were on a habitat diversity edge, right up against a clear cut, down on the bottom, where thermals were to their advantage. I mean, it was just like everything that I'd ever said. That's where they were. And it was pretty funny as to how perfect that was. But in that situation, for me, where I would think I would be looking in a pine thicket situation, not as much the marsh because I don't know much about marsh, but in a pine thicket situation, I would be looking for any little bit of habitat diversity that you have, and really honing in on those locations.
Cool.
Yeah,
I'm excited, man. This is I got to be honest with you. This is one of those things that you find and you go, oh wow, we are never going to be the same afterwards. And I feel like what you're doing is going to hurt people's feelings. Like I can tell you right now, I'm going to get a call from Brett the day after we post this about the moon phase, and we're going to have a whole conversation about it, right? Like, but there's moments where, like, I'll give you another great one. The Thermacell. The first time the Cabela's catalog came out with a Thermacell in it, the world was never the same. Suddenly places were a lot more enjoyable to be, right? Mm-hmm. So you're the next great revolution in deer hunting.
Derrick's the next Onyx.
Yeah.
The next
Seriously. I mean, because
Onyx has killed more deer than anything.
Yeah.
So. Yeah, no, and I think one thing also is that just the fact that there's going to be a lot of negatives that come from thermal drones as well. And people are definitely going to have to keep their eyes and ears open for that, because anyone with the available funding, as they continue to see the capabilities of these drones moving forward, they'll buy them. And I've already heard stories. And there's people out there that are definitely going to use these in hunting situations. And,
they're already using them in hunting situations.
Yeah, and that is quite clearly, as we all know, one of the most unethical things that you could ever attempt.
Absolutely.
To attempt to utilize one to be hunting. And in my opinion, from Whitetail research, if you're going to go out and spend 10 plus grand to go and kill a deer on wild properties, you just need to spend that money to go high fence on a property. And not one of those high fence properties where they might lose a deer because the properties are actually semi-wild. You need to go to the ones where they release a deer about 50 yards in front of you, and then they set a baiting station about 30 yards in front of you, and that deer walks a straight line to it so you can shoot it. That's the type of hunting that you need to do if you're willing to buy a thermal drone to go out and actually hunt directly based off of that information. So
you say that confidently because you know the capabilities? Is that kind of...
Yeah, no, 100%.
You know exactly what they can do.
Yeah, no, on that property, I would say if I wanted to go back to that property, which is sad actually, and I've had a lot of conversations with family members and stuff as well on it, because they in their perspective it's like, oh, you should be able to come back and hunt on it, and it's like they don't understand. Like, I have 3 locations that I could go to, and they are like almost 100. They're not. Nothing's 100% out there. But if I went to those locations consistently over and over and over again, like say I blocked off 7 days on the post rut or pre rut, I'm killing something. There's no way I'm not going to kill one of the mature bucks on the property. So I do not feel like I can go back and hunt that property again. I feel like I can take my son back out on that property and take him just kind of the style of hunting that I did growing up to these random locations, and we're going to fail and it's going to be fun, but I won't take him to those 3 spots that I know that are just ridiculous. So, yeah, but no, that's kind of a weird topic that plays around in my brain, is like, where's the ethicality for me in terms of getting back into hunting, and especially on the properties that I've researched. And in my opinion, I don't think that I should be hunting the properties that I've done a dramatic amount of research on. So,
you know, I mean, here's the thing. I agree with you. You really should not. Personally, you as a person should not do that. But if you were to just say, hey, these are areas that look really promising, and drop me a lat and a lawn, I know a couple guys who might feel a little differently, given that I haven't seen any of the footage. You could be garhole.
Well,
you know what I'm saying?
I mean,
like,
I'm
probably
poor,
pay
and
off
if
that
someone's
drone
willing,
with that
someone's willing
information.
to pay me some money, yeah. No,
Yeah, you could probably pay that drone off. No, you're giving out. Derek's giving out pins for the next family Christmas for the next.
that's right.
You said you got 3 spots, so
No.
three
Yeah,
years.
actually, yeah, I just started a Patreon, and if you go on there and start paying, then I'll just give you a pin to a new location on public land in every state. So yeah. Yeah,
That's
please
awesome,
record
dude.
that and repost that on YouTube. 10 times.
It's going to be a reel. You don't have to worry about it. Yeah.
No, 100%. Yeah.
This has
dude,
been fun.
I mean, listen, it's going to be a busy year. I'd love to follow up with you as you go and just kind of get the word out for you, because I believe in what you're doing. I think this is going to be awesome. I think it's going to equip people with the ability to just be better. They still have to execute. They still have to, do all the right things. But I think what you're going to do is kind of cut through a lot of that like cultural crap that we just kind of pass on, like, oh, the deer only move on the third Monday of every month between the hours of 1 and 4, right? Like, but there's just like so much of that like institutional understanding, right? But people come to podcasts like this, and they come to your channel looking to challenge that and be like, this just doesn't make sense. It's not adding up. And it's kind of one of those things. You got a guy who's dedicating you dedicated an entire year of your hunting to giving people the best information possible. And so your motives can't even be questioned. So I think this is great, man. I really appreciate you taking the time, an hour and a half out of your evening.
Yeah. Thanks, man.
Appreciate it, Derek, and I'm looking forward to watching your videos. It's gonna be fun.
And subscribing. Yeah.
Yeah,
And you're
can't
going to
wait.
subscribe. Yeah.
Can't
And like all of them as well. And leave a comment for the analytics. Yeah.
Well, there's a new boost feature. Have you seen this?
Oh, I haven't. No. Is that going to make me famous?
You can boost videos that you like, which is like there's a whole boosted list by category, so you can go to outdoors and the highest boosted. So if you like it, you can throw a boost down, and it's like 7,500 boost, and that's a whole new way of like making something popular. So boost his videos.
Y'all go boost
boost
Whitetail
my video.
Research.
Yeah, I need boosted.
Yeah.
Do whatever that is. Boost me.
Somebody boost the crap out of us too. Like,
Yeah.
give us a booster too. We need one. This is sounding a lot like vaccine shots.
Yeah, something.
All right, guys. I appreciate you. Y'all be good.